had to do an emergency podcast because there's just so much going on.
So much fire.
Man, are you hanging in over there? It's a lot.
Yesterday was one of the more. We talked about this yesterday. Obviously, with the pandemic happening, but yesterday was honestly one of the more enjoyable days I've had covering football for a long time, right? And obviously, hopefully we could add some enjoyment to other people's lives through doing it. But yesterday and this morning so far, especially with the Brady news, has been everything that the league probably wants the new year to look like.
Yeah, I thought of it similarly. I was like, this is, if you needed one story, I actually think Mina Kimes tweeted this out. It was like, Tom Brady is going to save NFL like media or, like sports media.
Yeah.
And it's bigger than that, honestly. Like I think he's like saving our attention from, things that obviously really suck and allowing us to feel like we should be just sitting in front of our TV, distancing ourselves from everyone and paying attention to what he's going to do. So he is. Well, he made the statement. He made the statement on Instagram that he is leaving. I'm curious, have you ever made any statements on Instagram about big life decisions?
No, interestingly, so you're somebody who's not really big into the whole tweeting out life decision here. Right. I'm moving, So when both of us got our jobs here, I was like, I'm just going to not do that because I know it's going to piss one of my best friends off. And so I didn't do it. And the only thing I've ever done was when I resigned from being a faculty member, I emailed the entire group of faculty that I was leaving. But I have never publicly, said anything, even when, so I've never been that way. But Brady did that today. And
he has like 50 million followers on Instagram. So it's hard for him to just like let people know, so I'll give him a pass.
But and it's been a really interesting week to follow, so we talk about gambling on this show. And I think the markets are a really fun indication of what might happen. And it's been really interesting to see, a couple weeks ago on my bookie, for example, Brady was plus 100 to go back to the Patriots all the way until I believe Saturday or Sunday, where I was looking, he was minus 155 to go back. And Tampa was something like plus 1,100, which is absurd. We fast forward to Monday morning, and he's minus 150 to go to Tampa Bay. Then fast forward to this morning, and he's 120 to go to Tampa Bay, plus 150 to go to the Chargers. And I think those two have sort of oscillated into the two favorites, and it appears as though it's moved back into Tampa Bay's court.
Yeah, it's interesting. They've gotten a ton of steam, and I wonder if it's just that they're leaking more things, which, I don't know if that's a good thing for them necessarily, because I believe that Brady wants to kind of do this on his terms, right? Very clearly, based on the way he did things today, it was like, hey, I'm going to call the shots here. This is my documentary. You're not going to, mess with the game plan. But the Chargers, that's like, maybe they just don't have anyone capable of leaking news. I don't know. I joked this morning that maybe he's just going to buy the Chargers because, like, there's just, like, no one. Like, at least with Tampa Bay, you've got Bruce Arians. You know who owns that organization, the Glazer family and everything. With the Chargers, it's like, who's even working there?
Well, that's the problem. So I tweeted out this morning why I think Tampa Bay is a better choice than the Chargers, ignoring the Colts, ignoring some of these other teams. Chicago. Because Dallas. If you think, Dallas to us was probably the best choice, but now it doesn't appear with Cooper signing a 5-year, $100 million deal and Prescott being under the tag, all that money is dried up really quickly, right? So you look at Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay's probably got the best two receivers in the league, especially now that Minnesota got rid of Stephon Diggs. So that's better than the Chargers even, who are pretty good there. They have a far superior head coach. They are in a state with no income tax. They're in a division that, even though the Saints are pretty good, their chances of winning the division in the NFC South are far higher than they are in the AFC West, because Kansas City would still be the prohibitive favorite over the Chargers should he join there. And then the conference is far less top heavy. I mean, if you're in the AFC, you have to go through Baltimore and or Kansas City to go to the Super Bowl. If you're in the NFC, there's a lot of good teams in the NFC, but none of them are, like the 49ers were a really good team last year, and they dump trucked the entire NFC in the playoffs. But year to year, they're not a team where you're like, oh my God, they're a juggernaut, right? So I think the NFC, and specifically Tampa Bay, is the preference for Brady. And I think that's what the betting markets indicated. As of an hour ago, he was minus 150 to go there.
Yeah. Okay. So I put together my list of arguments for what I think should be his top choice, which I believe should be the Chargers. And this isn't just, I know you want to say this is just me being a California homer and Los Angeles and, all of those things. I honestly do believe that plays a small role. Being in Los Angeles is a place where he could move his family. And I don't know which one. I think there might be some appeal to, hey, I'm going off to this like unknown land, Tampa Bay, and my family can't go with me because it's too dangerous. And, I've got to stake it out alone. Like, that could be kind of enticing. But so too would, I'm going to have this Beverly Hills mansion. Giselle and the kids can be there, and I'm going to go play football every Sunday, and it's never going to get below 65, even in the coldest months. To me, that is a thing. But I want to start with the football reasons, because you brought up two, and I actually think we're overlooking the Chargers in these situations. So Godwin and Evans are fantastic, but they are down the field receivers. That is where they absolutely go well and above replacement level. I know Godwin has done some things in the screen game, but in the intermediate level, in the short range, from the slot, Keenan Allen to me is like the perfect Tom Brady receiver. He's like Julian Edelman if Julian Edelman were way better. The way that he's able to get open, to me, it is maybe one of the more appreciated components of any NFL player out there. Mm-hmm. So to me, Keenan Allen, if you look at it, you're like, okay, who's the best receiver on either of these teams? For Tom Brady, it's Keenan Allen, even though I would rather have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And then you look at the other components, the tight end, Hunter Henry, far better. I mean, at least from what we saw out of O.J. Howard. I mean, maybe that was, Jameis Winston's fault. But Hunter Henry has produced. They have a great receiving back, and then they have a downfield threat in Mike Williams. So to me, the offense, it's not a big win for Tampa Bay, especially when you factor in Bruce Arians wants to throw the ball down the field consistently. Maybe Tom wants something a little more nuanced. The second thing on the football side is defensively. I know that we love what Tampa Bay has done, but is there a player on Tampa Bay's team defensively that you want ahead of Derwin James, Casey Hayward Jr., and Joey Bosa?
No, I more or less, to me though, those are great points. And the issue that you're going to run into though is both, with Bowles in Tampa Bay, he's superior to what the Chargers have and defense is more about depth in your play caller than it is stars, right? Because we've seen Bosa be injured for a significant amount of time. We've seen James be injured for a significant amount of time. And then on the offense, just to back up to your point on offense, like the Chargers are not from a position of strength at offensive coordinator. They had to move on middle of the season last year, and they did bring their incumbent guy back, but it's not the Leftwich and Arians sort of stability, having worked together for a while, that you sort of have, in Tampa Bay. So I agree. I agree that schematically it's a little bit tricky, and on defense the Chargers have more stars, but. And I agree that the difference isn't as big, but I think there is still a positive difference in the direction of Tampa Bay in both those instances.
I think what you're saying is basically it comes down to this. If he can get on board with Bruce Arians, then it probably doesn't matter, right? Like, because he's on board, he's going to love that team is built for a Bruce Arians system. But if there's any hesitation there, or if he's thinking to himself, kind of like Peyton Manning honestly did in Denver, where it's like, I don't need a fucking offensive coordinator. I'm Tom Brady. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to want to listen to Bruce Arians or Byron fucking Leftwich, right? I'm going to do this myself. Then maybe Los Angeles is preferable because he can go in there and do exactly that. I mean, he would basically be able, I would think, to dictate what they would do from an offensive coordinator standpoint, right? So to me, I think it's interesting, like, look inside of Tom Brady's head, whether he thinks he can do it himself or whether he thinks he still needs some help.
Yeah, the hard part about comparing him, though, I think the comparison is more Brett Favre than it is Peyton Manning, because Peyton Manning was still relatively young when he joined the Broncos. He was in his like mid to late 30s, whereas Brady is in his early to mid 40s almost at this point. So I think Arians, if you look at his mentality as a coach, Arians he's not young. He's had his time in Arizona. He's reached the NFC Championship game. He took a time off because of health, went to Tampa. Like, I think that's his mentality, is sort of that, hey, let's try to win a Super Bowl over the next 2 years, and then I don't really care after. And whereas I think the Chargers, I'm not exactly sure, I'm not exactly sure what, if there's stability with Anthony Lynn. There was always the issue of him possibly being fired after this season. And you look at that division, I'm not exactly sure whether they're the third best team from here on out.
Yeah. I said I wouldn't make a point for you, but I'm going to anyways, because I think it's compelling. And that's around the Arians offense. Pushing the ball downfield often is mistaken for taking a ton of deep shots, right? Like, we're going to throw it 20 plus yards downfield all the time. But what Arians' offense is really about is attacking that intermediate level instead of ever going short, basically, right? Like, we're going to treat 10 to 19 as the general, like 1 to 10, basically, right? And that's not a weakness of Tom Brady's at all. He has consistently been one of our highest graded quarterbacks, throwing that intermediate range, has always been top 5 from a grading and accuracy perspective in those ranges. It has been more about losing Gronk, who was great in those ranges, right? Like, you need guys to get open still. That is, it doesn't matter how accurate you are. If guys are not open, that's not going to happen for you. So to me, that's less of a worry than I think it probably should be. The bigger worry would be that if Tom wants to change something for a game, that might not happen, right? There might be some friction there. I have a couple of more reasons why I think Los Angeles makes sense, though. So you mentioned this today. The Super Bowl is in Tampa Bay this year. Where is it the next year?
It's in LA.
It's in Los Angeles. Now, this is important because if Tom Brady says, I have 2 years left, and you figure the first year, especially if you go to Tampa Bay, there's a learning curve there. And you go, really, I'm playing for one more. You have a better shot at getting it in year 2 than year 1 because of that, those growing pains. Nothing would be better than going out on your home field in Los Angeles, in that stadium, winning a Super Bowl, and riding off into the sunset. And I've got to think, for a guy that's probably making his second documentary while doing this whole rigmarole, he's thinking about that. There's no doubt about it. So I actually think the Super Bowl thing plays in Los Angeles' favor. And got
California may be a little bit more tolerant of open mouth kissing your kids to the degree that Tom Brady wants to. I get it.
And then you've got the whole stadium component, which is Tampa Bay. Raymond James Stadium is fine, but you have an opportunity to play in this gleaming new state-of-the-art stadium. There's going to be so many primetime games there. The optics of it for you at age 43, to me, like Los Angeles on a different playing field, And then the kicker, the 6th pick this year, is a huge asset. So if you're Tom Brady and you're coming in a la LeBron James to Los Angeles and you go, okay, I want to get a few pieces here, the 6th pick, you could either get a young left tackle or right tackle, but you could also trade that chip, for a lot of different pieces and all of a sudden have like shored up the one real big weakness, which is the offensive line.
Yeah, for sure. And that's really what my issue is that even though Tampa Bay doesn't have a great offensive line, they have a better offensive line than the Los Angeles Chargers do. Another question that I have. So I agree, and I give you crap for liking LA, and LA is a great place. Is there something though about being the worst team in LA that is a negative for Brady?
Okay, is it that clear cut though?
I don't know. So I think it's more of a White Sox Cubs situation where the White Sox are clearly the less preferred team, but they're not that much worse.
I think that's way too strong. The most popular team in LA doesn't play in LA. The most popular team in LA are the Raiders. The second most popular are the Steelers. The third most popular might be the Packers, right? Like no one really gives a crap about the Rams or the Chargers. To be perfectly honest with you, the reason people go to either of those, the reason people went to Rams games is because the Rams were winning. Like that's the whole reason.
Right, and I agree with you to an extent. But the Chargers are 2 years away from being 12-4 and winning a playoff game in 2018, and no one cared about them.
But LA is, but football. See, here's the thing. Football is about as team of a sport as you can find. LA is about as much of a non-team centric city as you can get. Yep. They are all about superstars, right? That's why those basketball teams, the Lakers teams, have thrived because they've always had superstars. And this would be the first time. There's no superstar on the Rams, at least from a broad media standpoint, that is getting any sort of notoriety there, right? This would be the first time that there is actually a superstar playing football in LA.
Okay, so one more pushback to that, because I actually don't know that you follow basketball a lot more than me. What has Kawhi's effect been on the Clippers? Because that would be basically what you're sort of thinking. And I think
Clippers, that's a great example, actually,
because Clippers are clearly the less preferred of those two teams. But Kawhi is a superstar who's just coming off of winning a NBA Finals, and I mean, have the Clippers boomed?
Well, I mean, they are. This is the most anyone's cared about the Clippers in forever. But I think that's a great point, which is Kawhi matters, but the Clippers were in a situation where even getting the best player in the NBA or one of the top 3 didn't matter because the difference between the Clippers and the Lakers was so large. But that's like, there's no, to me, there's really no difference between the Rams and the Chargers. It's just such a fair weather city from this perspective that either team could win it over.
If the Rams had spent all of their seasons in LA for the last 30 years, as opposed to 20 of them in St. Louis, there might be a difference. But I agree with you. Since they both came back within the last 3-4 years, there's probably not a humongous difference. There is a little bit of breaking news on this front.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Do we want to breaking news on here?
Absolutely.
So apparently, and this is being reported by Fox Sports.
Is this Cowherd?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead,
Cowherd is reporting that Tampa Bay will indeed be signing Tom Brady tomorrow.
Yeah. So I saw that before we came on.
What do you think? So here's a question. So let's say that you're looking at your sportsbook right now and they're still offering minus 150 on Brady. Do you limit bet that? Because that's really that's all, because I don't really care if Cowherd says this, because we want to, but from the perspective of, okay, is this actionable information? Do we trust this information? We like Colin, he has our people on all the time, but this might just be a farce, right?
I'm going to go see if it's still available.
Okay. Because I think A, would you bet a significant amount on minus 150 on Tampa Bay? And B, what would you make the fair odds?
This is a great question. Where is it here? So, what before you heard Colin's proclamation or breaking news, what would you have put the fair odds at on Tampa Bay?
As somebody who has a significant amount of money on him going to Tampa Bay when it was when it was plus 1100, the events of the last day and a half have made me a little bit nervous, and only partly because I had hedged with some New England, but I was exposed. I don't have any LA Chargers, and I would have probably put it at minus 120. Now with the Colin Cowherd news, I'd probably put it at minus 200.
I think that's fair. Now, on the sportsbook I'm looking at right now, the limits are 25.
Yeah. So that tells you. So those aren't to be taken seriously, right? Because they're just.
So that's a joke.
And even where I am, the limit is like $200 or $300. But it's sort of. But again, even in let's assume that you could have the most liquid market in the world. Let's say that it was, limits were like 10K. What would you?
10 grand. Yeah. I think I would. I think I would limit bet it. And the reason that I would do that is the competition. I don't have a lot of faith that the Chargers have made any sort of pitch to. It seems to me like for the Chargers to get this done, it just has to be a Tom Brady thing. Brady's just got to be like, I want to go here and I'm going to take over this team. I'm essentially going to run the Chargers. Whereas the Bucs are very clearly saying, hey, TB12, we want you.
Yeah, and I see some interesting movement here. I'm on betonline.ag, and now the Chargers are minus 150 and Tampa Bay's plus 110. So they're clearly not believing in Colin Cowherd's information.
Or they don't know.
They don't know, but it's interesting that these have flipped over the course of the last hour and a half, 2 hours. So that's interesting, right? I mean,
I can't. So I'm trying to. I mean, Cowherd is the kind of guy who, he takes what he does really, really seriously, and he doesn't need to break news to be relevant, right? His opinion on things is relevant. So I really don't think that he would just throw something out there that if it didn't come from a solid source. But what I'm curious about is when Tom Brady says something, is he sending kind of cryptic messages?
Yeah,
right?
Well,
that would be my thought.
We saw, Russell Okung say Brady to the Chargers. We saw Tyrann Mathieu tweet out Brady to the Chargers. And then we see Colin Cowherd here, said, and the quote is, I was just told that Tom Brady signs tomorrow with Tampa Bay. I don't know what that means. But I will say this, the betting markets are generally sharper than any one media source. And the fact that it went from Tampa Bay minus 150 to Tampa Bay plus 110 over the course of the last couple hours is very interesting.
So Jeff Darlington, who for 3 weeks has been saying that Brady was going to leave New England, he just tweeted, I would not anticipate a decision from Tom Brady today, but I do expect one this week. And let me emphasize, he absolutely has a decision to make in the future. His market is quietly very competitive, but not some crazy bidding war. Far more about finding a fit he likes rather than chasing the money. So the two things I take away from that are he hasn't made a decision yet, and that it really is going to come down to which of these. He's doing the same thing we are, basically. Yeah. He's sitting there and going, okay, pro, con, and hopefully he listens to this podcast, and then whoever he decides will mean that one of us is a better arguer.
Beta or mybookie.ag, a former friend of the program, Tampa Bay minus 110, Chargers plus 130.
Yeah.
I'm going to look at a few, but yeah, the point remains, right? It's a fluid situation. I'm not exactly sure. Coward's one of those where it's like, is he afraid to be wrong? No. So he could just throw that out there as something that, for content's sake. But it is really interesting. Do we want to talk
better? Sorry, I just want to ask one last question with this, because I think we should talk about the Pats and what they do now. I presume, and I'm with you on this, the Tampa Bay, if Brady wants to win a Super Bowl, Tampa Bay gives him a slightly better shot because of the strength of opponent. How much better, though, than going to the Chargers, in your opinion?
It's not that much better because the road is, but the issue is that if Tom Brady goes to the Tampa Bay Bucks, he significantly cuts off the legs, I think, of one of the contenders in the NFC, which is the Saints, because the Saints have, for the last 2 or 3 years, done a really good job in a really poor division, right? So that's kind of.
Would you say, okay, let me put it this way. Whether he goes, because I think you can make the argument, regardless of which team he picks, that team is not the favorite to win their division.
Yes. Yes, no doubt. The Saints are still the favorite to win the NFC South.
Because I think it's really not that far apart. The Chargers have more flexibility, I think, to make the most of Tom Brady. They'd have to get past Patrick Mahomes, sure, but you've got to get past
and Lamar
Patrick
Jackson.
Mahomes. Yeah, and Lamar Jackson. But they could knock, one of them could knock the other out as well. And you also don't have to get past the Houston Texans anymore.
Are we going to spend some time dragging Houston?
Let's save that for the end. Anything else Tom Brady wise before we move to the Pats?
No, I think this has been really fun, and honestly, it's not like anything we've seen. I mean, I don't know if you remember when Manning was a free agent. This was in 2012. I wanted the Chiefs to sign him, and Romeo Crennel was the head coach of the Chiefs. He had just replaced Todd Haley, and apparently the story is that the Chiefs made Peyton Manning a sizable offer, and he said no. That was the story. But it wasn't back then. It was like the Houston Texans and the Denver Broncos that wanted and were the serious contenders for Manning, and the we haven't seen something as cool as this since then, and I think it's even different now because Brady is a lot more washed than Manning was back then.
That's brutal. But Manning wasn't nearly, though, like the global superstar that Tom Brady is, and had this like serious neck surgery. Brady hasn't had that. Brady just had bad receivers. I don't know which is worse. I'm just happy in general because this is exciting. It makes the league so much more interesting, and it makes the next week obviously far more interesting. Also, if you see me like my head move up and down on the screen, it's because the only way that I can get like a decent shot given where I'm at is by kneeling, and I'm kneeling on a hardwood floor, and so like I have to like move occasionally to keep my knees from breaking. So
yeah, all of us having these makeshift places this week has been fun. I'm assuming some viewers have seen up my nose a couple times.
I'm one of them. In fact, I have this lovely board behind me that says "Dream" on it. So if you're looking for inspiration, you should watch the YouTube stream, and you can get some inspiration. Okay. The Patriots. So everyone and their mother has talked about a couple of different options. Teddy Bridgewater, your boy. Andy Dalton, who Solomon Wilcots has on good authority that Bill Belichick really likes Andy Dalton, which I find fucking hilarious. And then there's the Cam Newton one. And here's my opinion. All of those sound like first-round playoff exit to me.
At best.
What? At best. At best. So either they're going to go make a play for a guy that we have not thought of yet, which I don't see happening. I forgot to mention Jameis Winston as well. Or they're going to sit there and they're going to go, you know what? Why don't we tank? And to me, tanking is the quickest path to a Super Bowl.
Yeah, I talked about this on when we had the live show on Twitter. Belichick's really only come up against this problem one time, and
Yep.
the one and he had he's always preferred the Dalton type quarterback. The issue is that Brady turned out to be Tom Brady, but early in Brady's career, Brady was
Andy Dalton.
Yeah, he was Dalton with some clutchness to him, right? And then it was only like 2007 was the first year where like, oh my God, this is a real legit superstar quarterback. Not just a guy that won a few Super Bowls, but like back in Cleveland, he preferred Vinny Testaverde to Bernie Kosar. That was his guy that he rolled with, even though he was kind of Dalton-like. Yeah. So it makes some sense to me, although, in the New York Giants, it was Phil Simms, but then he preferred they had Hostetler and won a Super Bowl with him as a backup quarterback. So like, we don't have a ton of sample on Belichick doing things other than coaching the Patriots with Tom Brady, but those are them. And so if you sort of contort those, it kind of looks like Dalton.
Here's an interesting way to think about it. Tom Brady and Andy Dalton are way, way more similar on average than people probably want to think. And the difference between them, as you said, is that in the biggest moments, Tom Brady plays his best. And you're never out of it. Whereas there are literally games where from the first snap with Andy Dalton, you have zero shot.
I mean, when the game starts and the first number is 8 on the clock, it's over.
Exactly. I mean, right, but that's a huge deal, right? And then here's the second thing. Tom Brady is on one end of the coolness spectrum. Andy Dalton is literally on the exact opposite end of the spectrum. Like, as cool as Tom Brady is, Andy Dalton is, and I have nothing against Andy Dalton. This is just the way he's chosen to, kind of, live his life, I guess. He's like just not cool. And that is going to be super interesting because the Patriots and their fans have had this kind of fuck you attitude because they win Super Bowls, but also because they have a really cool dude at quarterback. And now they might have the possibility of not having that at all and going into these games where, like, if you have Andy Dalton at quarterback, and maybe this is what Bill Belichick wants, but it's like the only way you're going to win a Super Bowl is if you have some out of the blue, amazing defensive season. Maybe that's what he wants. Maybe he just wants to say, hey, I want an average quarterback and to win a Super Bowl like that. I don't know.
Yeah, but also isn't Dalton, I mean, we've already seen that Dalton's the perfect way to get the number 1 overall pick.
Yeah, when he gets injured. Do you need Ryan Finley too?
I mean, he didn't get injured, though. He got benched.
True. That's true.
Like if they want to tank, like that's the perfect thing about Dalton. 3 years ago, he had the team to 12-4, and this year he had the team to 2-12 or 2-11, whatever his starting record was. It's perfect, right? I mean, and some of these teams you look at, say Detroit. Detroit's a great example. By the end of September, Detroit's undefeated, and by the end of the season, they're 3-12, 3-12-1. Like you don't have to decide a priori whether to tank or not.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. But here's what I would say about that. You want in your tank to at least learn and have a possibility of learning about young players where you don't know their distribution. Andy Dalton, we know his distribution. You don't know the distribution of Jarrett Stidham. Now, it's probably awful, but that's fine. It being awful is perfectly fine with you. But there's that 1 in a million chance that he is fantastic. or that he plays decently well and you can trade him. And that's not going to happen with Andy Dalton, probably because of people not wanting to invest further in Andy Dalton, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm the Patriots, I'm sitting there and I'm going, why bother with Andy Dalton when we could potentially have Trevor Lawrence in a year? And guess what? Andy Dalton and a bunch of quarterbacks just like him are going to be available next year too. It's not like this is your one shot, one opportunity to get Andy Dalton to take snaps for you.
Yeah, but at the same time, to your point about trying to find out about players, though, I do think that Dalton allows you to find out whether or not N'Keal Harry is a complete disaster, more than Stidham does.
Sure. Sure. I mean, in fairness to Andy Dalton is a guy that has been top 5 in terms of our accuracy metrics. Now, he throws fairly short and has had good receivers, but accuracy has never been a question for him. He has always been a guy that throws quickly and that has had success when throwing quickly, which has been a hallmark of what Josh McDaniels and that Patriots offense has done. So maybe it's the perfect fit, and we're the idiots, and maybe they're playing in the Super Bowl next year. But, man, I got to think that there's a lot of guys like Andy Dalton that you could get. Would you, like, Teddy Bridgewater, how much of a step down from Andy Dalton would that be?
What? Are you just messing with me? I mean, here's the thing about Teddy. As much as I love Teddy as a person and as a football player, we don't know that much about him.
True. Yeah,
like,
no, you really don't.
All the problems that you talked about with Dalton are true about Teddy, except for the higher end is higher, I think.
It was interesting that Solomon was quick to say, yeah, they're similar, except that Teddy's less accurate than Andy Dalton, which I thought was pretty harsh.
BetMGM lines have just been re-put out there. Buccaneers minus 228, Chargers plus 175.
That sounds more like it.
Raiders plus 700, Dolphins plus 1100. Dolphins plus 1100 might be worth it.
That's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
Because you go to Miami, you have a ton of capital. You are going to get to play. It'd be so funny to play Andy Dalton and the Patriots twice. Like, that'd be hilarious. And the potential to take a team from worst to first. Like, if you wanted to say, this is how valuable I am to the Patriots or was to the Patriots, this is the perfect way to do it, right? To go to Miami and then win the division with the worst team in football the next year, right? Like that there would be no better way to do it than to do that. What was I going to say?
We were talking about Bridgewater and how he's not quite as accurate as Dalton, which is interesting because I think Teddy's before the hard part about Bridgewater is he was a starter so long ago that we hadn't even started tracking ball accuracy at the time.
Right.
But in some of our sort of like lower, so like there was one year where Bridgewater led the league in pressure rate, but also led the league in in our completion percentage that takes away drops and throwaways and stuff like that. So he's not inaccurate, but I do agree with you that Dalton is a very, very accurate passer.
All right, we done with this Patriots stuff? We're ready to move on?
Yeah, let's move on.
All right, let's hit a bunch of topics kind of quickly here. Cam Newton, who has an Instagram that is worth looking at. If you have not checked out Cam Newton's Instagram, you are missing out, man. It's incredible.
Cam's font is as wild as his attire.
It's like him throwing the ball downfield. You just have no idea where this letter is going. And he came out and basically said, I didn't ask for a trade. They're pushing me out. Whatever. That makes perfect sense. I'm not surprised by it at all because it was very clear that Carolina was moving in a different direction. If Cam is out there looking for a trade, give me the top 3 places that he should be trying to get traded to.
Well, that are good for him. I mean, I think Chicago's good for him. Matt Nagy schemes receivers open. They have some talent offensively. It'll be a friendly place for him to come from the fans' perspective, because they are, even though at this time last year they were calling us a bunch of idiots, they are soured on Trubisky.
Yep.
So I think Chicago is a perfect place for both parties. Indianapolis is another one where I think Reich will protect him with a good offensive line. They don't have, I don't think, the receivers necessary to make Cam as good as he wants to be, although Jack Doyle is sort of a very poor man's version of Greg Olsen in some sense. So there's a little bit of a connection there that Cam has had before. I don't hate that spot. And then if the Chargers don't win out on the Brady sweepstakes, I kind of like they're not trading him to Tampa Bay. So, in division. So,
Right.
But if Brady decides not to go to Los Angeles, it should, I think it's probably a pretty good fit for him to go to LA and capitalize on some of the talent they have there.
Yeah, I like the Los Angeles one quite a bit. Chicago's interesting because they don't have any assets to trade, but the Panthers also don't have a ton of leverage here, right? And unlike Dak, for example, there's probably not going to be a bidding war for Cam Newton. So Chicago's interesting. The Chargers have a good bit more capital, and I think that makes sense for the Chargers because the Chargers can't really go with just like no-name person. The Patriots would be a really interesting one because how would he is like the total opposite of Tom Brady. So it'd be very interesting to see whether they could fit him into that scheme. But Chicago to me is the clear winner, especially because it would.
Yeah.
It would be everything we've said that they should do.
Yeah. Well, you were on that first. And it does look like they are the favorite to land. They are the favorite to land Newton. So it's still plus money though.
Right now?
I saw it at plus 125. Allen Robinson liked the tweet, by the way, that said that DraftKings had him, or FanDuel, whichever,
really?
Had him. Yeah. Sportsbooks being awfully liberal with handing out, dealing lines now because they have no sports.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think Mitch Trubisky is doing right now?
I don't know. He doesn't seem like he doesn't seem like he's.
Do you think he turned the TVs off in his own house? Like, even though he has to stay at home, he's like, I can't take this. I'm going to turn the TVs off.
Do you think he's aloof or like oblivious to this? I feel like he's like self-aware enough to know that like he like blew it last year.
If he isn't, then that says it all, right? Then that was really his problem because he's got it. He had to know the writing was on the wall. I would love to see Cam in Chicago. That'd be awesome. All right, Next up, we've got your boy, Teddy Bridgewater, is now in Carolina. Do you think they see this as a long-term move, or is this a bridge over the troubled waters? You're welcome.
When he had a couple bad starts in a row, and they started calling him Teddy Pondwater as sort of a ponder Bridgewater back in the day. Here's the thing. They have some tools, I think, to make him successful. DJ Moore is a first-round pick that is pretty good after the catch. Bridgewater is a very accurate underneath thrower. Obviously, McCaffrey does things out of the backfield as a running back that, don't require a quarterback to have a huge ADOT. They're not good at tight end after they let Greg Olsen go, so that's a problem. Curtis Samuel's another guy underneath. They do need to accumulate some talent on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, they just let James Bradbury go. I think they're in partial rebuild mode, and then Bridgewater allows them, I think, to stay competitive. The big one for me, though, is Joe Brady. Last season, no one was considering Joe Burrow as a number one overall pick, let alone a first-round pick. He doesn't have the strongest arm in the world, and he was able to cobble together the weapons in LSU and put together a really efficient offense. Brady also has that connection with New Orleans previously. So there's enough there to make me optimistic, but there's also enough there to say, wow, this team might just be rebuilding, and Bridgewater is just the Ryan Fitzpatrick of this concoction.
Yeah, it's the perfect example of rebuilding while also seeing if there's something there with a guy that you don't know a ton about. Because as you said, we don't know a ton about Teddy Bridgewater. here's what this speaks to, and this is another one of your points that you said earlier today, which is, wow, the market for the quarterbacks after Tua and Joe Burrow is drying up real quick, right? If they wanted to take Justin Herbert at 7, I don't think they're signing Teddy Bridgewater. So to me, this says that they do not think highly of Herbert or Jordan Love for that matter. What's interesting is that
which is smart. I mean, because they're not worthy of it in our opinion.
No, absolutely. What's interesting is that they are not that far away. Now, if you look at that 7th pick and you go, okay, what if they go receiver? Like, there's a place where they, I know they lost Greg Olsen, but obviously McCaffrey's a great receiver out of the backfield. DJ Moore is pretty solid. Like, they could have a decently dynamic offense with Joe Brady, installing that kind of scheme that he wants. They could be not terrible, and they might say, oh, we'll stick with Teddy. I really like that signing. I thought it was a shrewd move by them, where I thought they were going to just kind of tank for Trevor by not picking a quarterback. And at least here they're giving themselves a chance to win, one of two ways. What else do we have here? The Rivers stuff to Indianapolis, I guess, hasn't been confirmed yet, but it's seen, a couple people that have reported it. That's exciting. I think that's the right move. We've talked about this for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I have nothing against that move.
It's the right move for Indianapolis it's the right move for Indianapolis, but it's funny that they decided also to say, okay, well, if we're going to bring in Phillip Rivers, we're also going to trade away our best asset in the 13th pick to the Niners.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Broke on the air yesterday, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, that's just like, to me, that's a ridiculous, as smart as the Rivers move might be, trading a first rounder for an interior defensive lineman is like head scratching.
It probably took them out of the Brady sweepstakes, frankly.
You have championed Chris Ballard for a while, and I, for one, am a big Chris Ballard fan because he works out a lot, but has made some shrewd moves. When you see something like this, how do you reconcile it?
It makes me wonder. It is inconsistent with everything he's done. I mean, you look at the Justin Houston move, you look at the Jack Doyle versus Eric Ebron, you look at the offensive line and what they've done there. It really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so it's a head scratcher. So it must mean he agrees with us in a significant number of places, but all of a sudden turns coat and thinks that an interior defensive lineman is the difference between a good defense and a bad defense.
Or a good team and a bad team. I mean, DeForest Buckner's great, but I mean,
well, here's a question. Is he better than Chris Jones?
No.
I would not. And that's the thing. Chiefs fans think that they can get Chris Jones for $18, $19 million a year.
The Chiefs have got to be absolutely furious that they didn't get this pick.
Yes. I
Right?
thought Jones was a bottom half of the first round, early second round trade, and they go, and now the Chiefs are the Chiefs. Like, did Ballard do this just to piss off his old colleague Brett Beach and screw over the opportunity to get for the Chiefs to get anything? Because the problem is now they're going to be stuck if they pay Jones market value. You got 2 defensive linemen over $20 million a year.
Yep.
So, but and the tricky part now, if you're the Colts, and why probably Brady doesn't want to go there, and why it's probably a good move for them to go with Phillip Rivers, because he's probably going to be less stingy about stuff because he's not as good. You don't have a great receiving core. You have T.Y. Hilton, you have Paris Campbell, you have Zach Pascal, Jack Doyle. You needed the 13th pick to capitalize on some of these receivers.
Yes.
In the draft. And now you used it to get DeForest Buckner, which, I'm sorry, but if you watched the Colts last season and came to the conclusion, you know what, our defense regressed, that's why we didn't win as many games, you're a fool.
An idiot.
Yeah.
You're an absolute idiot. No, I agree. That trade, though, not quite as bad as what Bill O'Brien did.
Well, especially when you look at the end of the day and find out that the Vikings got a first, a fourth, a fifth, and a sixth for Diggs. Unbelievable. Who Diggs is a great receiver. He's nowhere near as good as Hopkins.
Nowhere near as good. And that trade, you would still even say, nice job by the Bills there. I mean, so let's talk about the Bills trade first, because I think that sets us up for the Texans trade. You're a team like the Buffalo Bills, and you go, we have invested in the current infrastructure that we have. Now, I'm not saying that's what they should do, but they have said Josh Allen is our guy. If you are resigned to taking a wide receiver with your first round pick, and you have the chance to trade it for a guy, his contract's not terrible, right? By any stretch of the imagination. For a wide receiver where you know what you're going to get, I like that move, because the variance is so high with any draft pick. And so to me, I think that's very shrewd.
Well, the Bills are in a solid position right now where given all the decisions that they've made, and most of them are good, they are in win now, especially with New England weakened by the loss of Brady. Miami still has a ways to go to be competitive, and the Jets being the Jets, they have a shot to be the third seed in the AFC, and Diggs is sort of a missing piece. If
Do you
Josh
think
Allen
they had heard about Brady and then pulled the trigger?
Well, I think if you're for one, there's no guarantee the Patriots would be good enough anyway.
Sure.
And but then the added uncertainty, I would imagine, added to their but it's even a cherry on top now. If they were just trying to compete with the Pats, now that I think they're clearly the favorite ahead of them. But especially now that the Patriots didn't get somebody like Bridgewater in the fold. But you look at this, and it is the only tricky part is giving up a fourth the following year, because I don't mind giving up a first this year because you're not moving on from Josh Allen. But next year, you better have some picks, because if Allen stinks this year, you're going to want to not be the Bears. You're going to want to be able to move up and take a quarterback. And unfortunately, without a fourth next year, they just have a little bit less flexibility to do that. And without the young players that the fifth and the sixth and the first give them this year, there's a little bit less flexibility. So that's my only concern there. On the Vikings end,
hold on, before you get to the Vikings, though, you triggered something that I thought was really interesting. The comparison to the Bears is excellent because of the Allen, Trubisky. Both of them are not nearly as good as their fan bases think they are, just objectively, right? They're not as accurate or as good throwing the football. And everyone would say, oh, the Bears getting Khalil Mack, way bigger help to their team than the Bills getting Stephon Diggs, who, by the way, requires less money and less draft picks. I would take Stephon Diggs in that trade 150 million times out of 100 over that Khalil Mack trade. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at how badly the Bears fucked that trade up.
Yep.
Because this type of trade was out there.
Yeah, well, and right, it's there's no shortage of these types of deals to be made, and luckily the smart teams like the Bills, and I even think the Browns with Beckham, it hasn't worked out yet, but it's sort of a similar idea. The teams that's the way to find out really quickly if your quarterback's good, right? Yep. Like after this season, if they go into the year and say, okay, we got a pretty good offensive line, we have 3 pretty damn good wide receivers and a good defense and a decent play caller. If Josh Allen stinks, he stinks. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And so to the degree that this also buys you some certainty around your quarterback position, good or bad, is also a good move in the validity of that. I'm just a little worried about compensation, which spins it over to the Vikings side, in which case, do you agree with me here? I think this trade for Minnesota is a good trade in a vacuum. But when you couple it with every other decision they made yesterday is a complete disaster. I don't understand how every single, from signing CJ Ham to a 4-year deal that's paying him $4 million a year, to signing a punter for $3 million a year, to franchise tagging Anthony Harris, to signing Kirk Cousins to 3 more years. The only thing about that Kirk Cousins deal that's good is that it waives his no trade clause. That's the only thing that's good about that deal. It's like Tannehill. The moment the deal was signed, we wondered how to get out of it. That's how you know it's not a good deal. And they pound through with winning. They're going to sign Everson Griffin back. Like they're going to sign Dalvin Cook to a contract extension, which is just going to throw lighter fluid on this entire thing. Me neither. And then they trade Diggs. Everybody's like, oh, they're getting great compensation back. It's a great wide receiver draft. Have you seen the wide receivers the Vikings have taken in the first round? Laquan Treadwell, Troy Williamson.
Yeah, we haven't seen as much of them because they flame out so quickly.
They flame out so bad. Like this team doesn't know what they want to do. And I get it from the perspective of like, if they have a bad year this year, Zimmer and Spielman are probably fired, but they're going to trading Diggs almost assures that they're going to have a bad season this year.
My question with this,
rant over.
The Eagles re-signed Jalen Mills. Doesn't matter. The interesting thing about this is if you are trading Stephon Diggs because he doesn't get along with your quarterback and you re-sign that quarterback to a 3-year deal, yet your quarterback really hasn't done Kirk Cousins is not a better player at his position than Stephon Diggs is, right? So I think it's a little weird that you would go and side with the quarterback so quickly in this situation and not at least look at it like, hey, maybe there's a little truth to both sides of this. Like maybe Stephon Diggs is unhappy because this quarterback is like a quack, and maybe we shouldn't commit to either one super long term. But you brought it up, for the Vikings, who could not find a third receiver to save their lives, their immediate need is now to draft a wide receiver. And if you are committing to this quarterback in Kirk Cousins, you are trying, whether people are friends or not, to win a Super Bowl in the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
Their immediate need is now to find the next Stephon Diggs. Good fucking luck.
Yeah, you're rolling the dice just to get back to where you were a season ago, which is 2 receivers and no third receiver.
Yep.
Like you should have been in a position to roll the dice to get better than where you were a season ago, and instead, you're completely screwing the pooch. You look at Cousins' career. Pierre Garçon left him. Deshaun Jackson left him. Ryan, there's a certain wide receiver who was supposed to visit the Vikings who still doesn't have a job, that decided he would rather not visit the Vikings than visit the Vikings and possibly play with Kirk again. That's a problem, isn't it?
You know what it is? We all know this person or have heard of this person, right? It's the girl or the guy who you meet them once and you go, wow, like, what a great person, really good looking, has their lives together, makes good money. Oh, they're single and they're 35? How does that happen? And they're like, oh, yeah, just had a bunch of relationships and never quite worked out. And you're like, I wonder why that is. And then you hang out with them like 3 more times and you're like, oh shit. This person is and then really weird.
And then they end up like Kirk, where there's a ton of people I know and I wonder how the hell are they married?
Oh man!
So we're gonna come up for water. Kirk's gonna be 40 years old. He's gonna be starting for the Dolphins, and we're gonna be wondering how Kirk has had this many starting jobs.
I'm here for that. All right, let's close it out with a little Bill O'Brien. Can you liken what happened to Bill O'Brien or what Bill O'Brien did to anything that you've ever seen in life, in or out of football?
I mean, I distinctly remember somebody like hitting on a 14 against a 6 at a blackjack table, and then our friend and colleague Ben Brown trying to flip the table over on him. That to me is the closest thing to what we saw Bill O'Brien do yesterday.
I have experienced this exact situation before. and I'm gonna explain it to you. The first year I ever played fantasy football, I was 11 and a half. And I was working at a sports card and memorabilia and candy shop in town. I hung out there all the time because they had cable. Owner was this awesome dude. His name was Joe Carcione. He's just like this guy that just loved sports. So he got this fantasy group together, and they did all the sports, and they were a bunch of like card collectors and like kind of shrewd, older, retired dudes mostly, and then a couple of like high school age kids that worked there. So I'm the youngest kid in this by a mile, by about 7 years, and I've never played fantasy football before, and the buy-in is $250. It's a 2-quarterback league. I study my ass off for this draft, and I end up in this draft with LaDainian Tomlinson and Jamal Lewis the year Jamal Lewis went for 2,000. I am destroying this league. I am killing people. Okay. I'm in first by a mile. LaDainian Tomlinson tweaks his shoulder. Some asshole spends the next week convincing me that LaDainian Tomlinson might not play again this year. And basically swindles me, trades me Willie Green and Corin Robinson for LaDainian Tomlinson. LaDainian Tomlinson went for 195 and 2 touchdowns the next fucking week.
Was this Corin Robinson Seahawks or Corin Robinson Vikings?
This was Seahawks.
Okay.
Willie Green, I think, pulled a knife on his girlfriend a week later. I don't think he even got to 195 yards in total that season. I went from winning the league by a mile to not even placing. I was swindled like every 11-year-old should be swindled. I mean, I got absolutely trounced. It was a formative time in my life. Now, what I just did was made the comparison to Bill O'Brien, current NFL GM and head coach, and 11-year-old George playing his first fantasy football league with people that are way older and more experienced than him. That should not happen. That's ridiculous. It's the worst trade I could possibly imagine. I can't imagine it happening. I think it's the worst trade I've ever seen.
We talked about this yesterday. I mean, it's clear that he didn't get along with Hopkins, and it's clear that he didn't understand how important it is for him to get along with Hopkins. Because I just don't. And I think it's the same thing with Diggs. I think it's the same thing back in the day with Randy Moss. I think it's the same thing, anytime you trade a player at an important position who's really good, you're almost never going to get in return what you think you should get. Yep. And you're almost never going to recoup the value because you go from, certainty and it's certainty you pay for sure. But you're never going to go. You're going to go from certainty to uncertainty, and there are rare exceptions. I remember the Chiefs traded Jared Allen to the Vikings and got Brandon Albert and Jamal Charles in return, and it was pretty good, right? But for the most part, the team that's dumb enough not to get along with a superstar player is not going to be smart enough to make something out of the capital that they get from him, and when you compound that to the point where you don't even get capital that's requisite. Like with the Vikings, we saw that Diggs, they got good capital for Diggs. Now that whether they do anything with it, it's another story. The Houston doesn't even get anything back. So no. It makes you scratch your head. And again, it's to this point, and I talked about this yesterday. People who manage people have to know, there's a difference, right? The famous Jimmy Johnson, when he cut a player who was sleeping during a meeting, and somebody was trying to get him and say, "What would you do if Troy Aikman was sleeping?" He's like, "I'd wake him up." You know what I'm saying? DeAndre Hopkins is such a good player. You make it work. And if you can't make it work, it's probably a you problem because he doesn't seem like a bad guy. No,
I agree with you. It made me think about Deshaun Watson, and I feel bad for Deshaun Watson, honestly, because they were a couple of pieces away from being a legit Super Bowl contender. And now they're a lottery ticket away, from it, right? DeAndre Hopkins is a lottery ticket type player where you are praying when you draft a receiver in the first 2 rounds, you get anything close to DeAndre Hopkins. And now that's what they need. I mean, when you don't have a receiver that is that good, that is something that you desperately need. And now they desperately need it. And Deshaun Watson has got to be sitting there like, man, like maybe this is not the place I can be for the rest of my career.
Yeah, it's weird though. I came away from it, and this has been like I call it like the Bill O'Brien curse or something, the curse of whatever. But the Houston's going to compete next year. They always do. Like they're going to find, like Watson's going to find a way, and and Bill O'Brien's going to win another AFC South title at 8-7-1, and like they're going to make the playoffs, and Watson's going to pull an amazing performance out of his ass, and Bill O'Brien's going to be extended again, and that's the tricky part of this whole thing is, and maybe I don't think this is going through Bill O'Brien's head, but it's an argument you can make. It's like, well, as long as we have Watson, we'll be fine. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think Watson's a step below the caliber of quarterback that you can give him anything and he'll still be good. But he has been a terrific quarterback so far. So, that might, without a first-round pick, it might suck. But it's not like Tennessee is burning the place down. It's not like Indianapolis is any good. And Jacksonville's rebuilding more than probably any team in the league, maybe other than Carolina.
I just can't believe that the Cardinals announced they were going to try and get out of David Johnson's contract. In other sports, like basketball, when you want to do that, you have to give up a pick to do so. They didn't really have to give up a pick. They gave a second rounder. They didn't have to give up a first rounder. And they got back a top 3 receiver in the NFL. It's fucking amazing to me that I can't believe this happened. Good for the Cardinals. I think it's fantastic for the Cardinals. That division is going to be a lot of fun. We'll talk more about the Cardinals, obviously, as the offseason goes. I have news for you.
Oh,
Jordan Howard.
Yeah, I was just going to say. The
first running back to sign, baby.
Yeah. Let's go.
So
the tank is on.
That's how we'll end this podcast. Maybe we'll have to do another emergency pod tomorrow. Who knows?
Yeah. This has been fun, man. We'll see what happens with Brady, and I can't wait to sort of, unlike some years, right? Like the season win totals and the betting odds haven't changed remarkably because there hasn't been a whole lot of quarterback change. I think this is the first time where we're going to see a decent amount of shuffling. So we'll have that to discuss.
Plus the new playoff schedule. So it'll be fun. Stay safe over there. Distance yourself from everyone. And hope you don't run out of toilet paper. Peace, brother.
Yeah.